All right, it looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Thinkful's Hangouts, our weekly Hangout series. Last week, we talked with some people about the different career paths they had taken to start working in software development. And we spent a lot of time actually talking about the job search process, about what their different experiences were, kind of coming from different educational backgrounds. And this week, we have a bunch of folks who are involved in hiring or have been very heavily involved in hiring at various parts of their career.
Totally. We have the most badass developers, recruiters, and employers here, so get stoked for an awesome conversation.
Yeah, so we're basically just going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about kind of what they look for, what their advice is for people who are interested in getting an interesting job in software development, and just kind of go from there. I'll ask people to introduce themselves, and Eli, you're on my left, so I'm going to start.
Well, why don't we start out with, I'm sure if you haven't been to a hangout of ours before, Gray does.
Oh yeah, I should introduce myself. Sorry. Yeah, I lead education operations here at Thinkful, which involves talking to people a lot, and for that reason, I think Laura roped me into these weekly hangouts.
I do community stuff, which is why I roped him into these weekly hangouts. And we've got Thomas over here who.
Yeah. Thomas, I'm the developer here at Thinkful. I started as an intern back in February and was hired full-time in April.
Yep.
Awesome. So we're going to go to the first bobbing head. Take it away, Eli, and tell us about why you're so awesome.
So awesome, I'm not sure about, but hi, my name is Eli Goodman. I am the CTO of a company called Little Borrowed Dress. We're a company that's focused on helping to make the bridal planning process less stressful and more affordable for brides. Before I did this, I was a director of engineering at Etsy for 3 years. So I did a lot of hiring there, doing a lot of hiring here. That's sort of my deal.
All the hirings.
Basically all of them. No.
All the hirings. Tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lee.
Sure. So I'm an engineering manager at Groupon. We are doing a bunch of hiring here in New York. And I joined about a year ago when Groupon acquired our startup, which was called SideTour, and did a lot of hiring there. So I've done a little bit of hiring, I guess, both in a small startup environment and in a big company environment with 500 engineers. Before that, I was at Pivotal Labs as a consultant, did a lot of interviewing there. And in kind of a previous life, I worked in military robotics at iRobot in Boston.
Which is a whole other conversation we're going to need to rope you into later, just FYI.
You bring me on for the Google Hangout about military robotics.
No idea. Yeah.
We just added that to the list. Like just.
We do have a topic coming up talking about veteran services and all that good stuff. So, yeah, we'll table that one.
Yeah. And then Rockman, take a second to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so currently I am the co-founder and chief people officer of a brand new startup. We're still really early, so no name, not much to disclose as of yet. But prior to that, I was at MongoDB for the past 2 years. I think I was probably employee 120. When I left, we were over 400, so some pretty heavy growth there. Right before that, Facebook. And before that, I ran technical recruiting over at Guild Group, where I was probably employee about 200, and when I left, we were about 1,000. So talk to a lot of people every day, so just some growth ahead of us.
He's also the owner of the best picture on this hangout so far, guys. Medal, anything tiger related, sold.
So I guess the first question I want to start off with is something actually really relevant to each of the folks that we have here. I want to talk just quickly about what kind of our challenges are in hiring, because I think that'll inform the rest of the conversation that we have. So. Eli, you're hiring now for a young company, a small startup. What are some of the biggest, like, couple bullet points? Like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing right now in finding good candidates?
That's a good question. I would probably say that the biggest challenges we face are finding somebody with a very well-rounded palette of abilities. Because at a very small company, you don't have very specialized teams. You don't have like a front-end group or an ops group or a back-end group. Everyone sort of has to wear all the hats at the same time. And so for me, I'd much rather have somebody with a breadth of experience doing lots of different things, because there's no room to be like, oh, that's not my job. I can't do it. what I mean? So finding someone who has enough breadth is really probably the biggest challenge that I face.
Is that hard to find somebody that has kind of that variety of experience or that variety of competency?
I think the thing that's challenging is to find, like, because I'd say yes, because especially if somebody is coming from a bigger company, that is sort of the mentality they've come in with, which is like, I've never done that before. There was an ops team that handled the servers, so I didn't touch servers, and I don't feel comfortable doing that in a production environment. So sometimes people's experience almost works against them, because they obviously also need to have a pretty high level of aptitude because they're moving fast, and there's not a lot of room for mentorship or slowing down. So they both need to have the comfort of touching a lot of different things, and also the aptitude to contribute really quickly.
Yeah, pretty cool. So Lee, what is that? Do you face kind of similar challenges in the roles that you're involved in hiring for, or that you've been involved in hiring for?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I definitely would totally echo that when I was doing hiring for SideTour. At Groupon, it's a little different. I mean, everyone here really is kind of a full stack developer. But the biggest challenge I think we have is finding people with experience with working at a company of our size and scale, both in terms of the company and teams and that kind of thing, but also in terms of the technical realities of when you're working at a scale like this. When we launch at our startup, we were a really big fan of kind of the lean startup MVP kind of approach, where we would launch a feature and try to test it out and see if it's working. But those tests would be against a small number of people because our audience is small compared to Groupon's. With Groupon, every feature we put out goes in front of, I don't know what the number is. I think we have 50 million active users on a monthly basis here. So you can't just sort of hack something together, throw it on Heroku. You actually need like database replication, load balancers, all this stuff, and it's a very different mindset from just putting a Rails app together and throwing it up online somewhere. So I definitely think, at least here in the New York job market, there's somewhat of a shortage of that just because of the number of companies here that are at our size and scale is much smaller.
Yeah, fair enough. Rockman, what are some of the challenges that you faced in just finding good people to work with?
Finding good people, just in general.
Yeah, just finding good developers to work with.
Sure. So I think to echo both their points, it's difficult to find people that are, well, first off, full stack. A lot of places are fairly compartmentalized, where you have front end, back end, et cetera, et cetera. But beyond that, I think for our current company, what we're hiring, you need people that are fairly autonomous. We're a total of 7 people right now, and I was talking to one of our engineers about hiring today. It becomes fairly difficult just because someone works really well in a larger company. They segment it in a smaller area. They have leads that'll be able to mentor them in every sort of way. For us right now, it's quite frankly, everybody's heads down. Everybody has work to do, and there's not much. I don't want to say collaboration. That's not the right word, but it's not as much talking amongst back and forth, working through stuff and working through problems together. Just because we have so much to do in such little time before we actually end up launching. But prior to that, I think just finding engineers that are pretty inquisitive about stuff, knowing more than just their day-to-day work and actually contributing to other stuff is fairly difficult, and that's why people are looking at GitHub, stuff like that, pretty frequently.
Next question, Rockman, how are you guys sourcing and sort of finding those candidates, and where, if you're kind of being a Thomas or a junior developer, someone who kind of starts out, where should you try to get your face out there and get yourself noticed?
So for me personally, I think Stack Overflow, between Stack Overflow and GitHub, those are probably going to be the best places. LinkedIn is really heavily used, and I will continue using that. But I think if you're talking about social presence, have a website. If I do a Google search for certain people, hopefully your name comes up. But beyond that, I think those are probably the most important places.
Yeah, Eli, are those the same resources that you use when looking around?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Rockman's totally right. Like having a GitHub profile is an amazing thing that we didn't have when I started out in the industry. And being able to go when somebody applies, being able to go to the GitHub profile and actually see code that's not only functional but well documented, and that's potentially in use or forked by other people is just my eyebrows go up and I go, oh, okay, yes, I will talk to this person. But also, I think there's also no replacement for knowing people, and it's sort of a hard thing to bootstrap, to start knowing a lot of people. I think like meetups are an obvious thing to reach for, but my experience with them has been not so great. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to a junior person. I think it seems like it would make a lot of sense. Like, oh, a lot of, what's that? Why
I
not?
said, why not? From your perspective.
Yeah, it's.
Like,
I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It's a lot of people, right? And they're open to everybody, and a lot of people show up. Sometimes people that you really want to meet, sometimes people that you really don't want to meet, and sometimes it's hard to know. I usually enjoy them from like a social perspective. Like everyone who shows up is interesting and cool, but if you're in a focused place where you really want to be looking for a job, sometimes it's not the most productive use of time. But I found, especially when I was younger, I knew just like one or two people from college who were in New York who were also CS majors, and like I really tried to get them to introduce me to the people that they knew, like to really use strong connections as opposed to fostering lots of weak connections. I found that to be good when I was first trying to get into the industry.
That's awesome. Lee, have you had similar experiences as well? Or what, how do you go about finding the best and the brightest?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that have been said, I definitely put a lot of emphasis on GitHub as well. I think having sort of a mature GitHub profile, and that to me that means if you're contributing to open source, that's amazing. I guess one thing that often turns me off from GitHub profiles is if I see a lot of the repos are sort of like tutorials from books. I think it's awesome to like learn a new language, like do a tutorial or like have a project that you did in college or something like that. But then make that repo private, pay the $7 a month so that you can make it private and recruiters won't see it, or delete it, or But I'd like to see a really strong GitHub profile of like, oh, like this person, they tried Ruby, or they like they made this thing in Go, or especially with junior developers, I like to see a lot of breadth. So I think it's hard as a junior developer to have a lot of depth early. So instead, what I'm interested in is how curious are you? Do you like learning new things? Are you an eager learner? Because that's sort of what you're going to need to do in a job.
Yeah,
definitely. Thomas.
And then Lee, just a quick follow-up question: how would the breakdown would you say of the people that you kind of talk to in the hiring process? How many of them are from like online sources, and how many of them are from kind of networking or kind of in-person relationships?
Let's see. I would say this time when I was doing hiring at the beginning of SideTour, my network was much weaker, and I had a lot of definitely had more people that I sort of found on the internet. Now my network is stronger, and I think probably half the people I've interviewed have either been like first or second degree connections. Yeah, I think, and also, I mean, another factor is the number of people I've looked at is much bigger at Groupon, because we also have an HR department that's helping us with recruiting. And we also have a lot more inbound people, just because people know about us. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question. I would say, I don't know, it's maybe 50-50 at Groupon. And at SideTour, it was, I don't know, maybe 10 my network, 90 outside.
Yeah, which I think, if we're talking about a funnel, kind of illustrates the power of in-person relationships, because certainly not half of the people who are interested in working with Groupon, through personal relationships, but if half of them who've made it to that stage of the funnel, in person, that kind of like illustrates the power that has for networking. Thomas.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to the power of in-person relationships. Sorry. I did go to a few meetups. I also found that they were, a lot of people, but I didn't really get to know anybody there. What was more beneficial was going to a hackerspace actually here in Manhattan, and that sort of fostered the environment that I was looking for to actually build relationships with the people there. So I would show up for open house, and I was working on my own projects, and I could go and I could get help, and I could, meet and talk to people that were doing the same thing. But my focus was heavily project-based, like everybody else said, working on GitHub, that kind of thing.
How did you end up transitioning into being at Thinkful from the hackerspace?
From the hackerspace? Well, someone at the hackerspace turned me on to a free co-working space here in Manhattan. So I just went there and worked on projects pretty much full time, like I was at a job. um, and it was good, but also getting out there and meeting people, meeting up with the connections that I had in New York, and eventually and sort of talking a lot about what I was working on, and what I hope to be working on soon. And eventually, one of those people sort of introduced me to a few of their friends here in New York, and one of those turned into a job.
Yeah, one of those is Daryl.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that one of the overwhelming things from a more junior person's perspective is trying to figure out what types of jobs they should be applying for and where they should be looking for more junior level jobs. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. So Rockman, for somebody who's coming out of a computer science undergrad or who's been spending a lot of time kind of learning on their own, looking for a junior position, where do you recommend that they get started?
So I would say networking is probably going to be the biggest and best thing. I think Thomas, anybody said it correctly. I don't know if Meetup is going to be the right way of going about it, but really the best way of going about this kind of stuff is trying to find a position that you're genuinely passionate for. I mean, getting beyond the I guess the resume filter is already one portion of it, right? But knowing that you're going to be working on something and really being excited over the phone, or in talking to someone that currently works at the company, regardless of where you meet them. If you show that genuine passion, they're probably going to be a lot more interested in wanting to talk to you, even if you're more of a junior candidate as opposed to a senior candidate, right? Like if a senior candidate is not too interested in the role, you may get there are some pros and cons, but a junior person that can potentially learn and grow into that role, but be really excited and ecstatic about it, is going to be much more better.
And what kind of job titles should they be looking for in their search? Like what types of positions would be good for somebody just getting started?
So I think it depends. I don't think there's too many junior software engineering roles or that title being thrown out there, right? But you can definitely look at campus recruiting events. I think most of the larger companies have a very strong campus ambassador program, have a very strong campus recruiting program that people come on site. I mean, granted, there's a lot of people that go to these things, but it's a good place to start. And I think as these companies are growing larger, their tech campus recruiting teams are getting stronger and stronger. So you should be able to find people that way.
Yeah, very cool. So Lee, you have experience in the kind of startup scene, in the larger corporate scene. For people at the beginning of their career, do you recommend that they spend their time focusing on one of those two areas, kind of look broadly, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to taste. I mean, I think that you can get a great job at a big company, or you can get a great job at a startup, but be aware of sort of what's different about them. At a startup, you're kind of like how Eli mentioned, at a startup, you're going to get your hands in a little bit of everything. You're going to see stuff happen really fast. At a big company, you may solve one small problem. Like you may actually be the engineer who spends 6 months on adding a button to Google Maps, but you're going to learn a lot really deep about, how does a big company work like this? How do decisions get made? When Google adds a button to Google Maps, they're spending a long time thinking about why are we adding this button? What problem are we solving? So there's a lot of deep problem-solving stuff that you're going to be able to do. But I think my recommendation that I most often give my friends who are brand new, and this is a little bit colored by my experience, but I think going to an agency, like a Pivotal Labs or ThoughtWorks or ThoughtBot, that kind of thing, can be awesome because in a year you may work with 3 or 4 clients, and you'll see a big range of companies. Some of them might be startups, some of them might be big companies. You'll be working with tons of people. You'll learn so quickly. I think I'm a huge fan of that approach. And I definitely would recommend that over freelancing. Some people think, hey, I'm going to, they look at freelancers and say, they get to charge X per hour. That's a lot of money. You may make a lot of money in the short term, but I don't think it's great for your resume or career in the long term.
Yeah. So on the topic of digital agencies, what do you recommend people interested in pursuing that route kind of focus on? Are there any specific technologies that you think are most useful, head in that direction, or any particular things that they would want to learn or add to their resume before they take a crack at that?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any particular recommendations there. I mean, there are a lot of great technologies out there. I think it probably makes sense to do, to get really great at one thing for sure, but not get pigeonholed, which is potentially hard to do. Yeah, I mean, some agencies are kind of known for one particular thing. For example, in New York, Two Toasters is a really great consultancy that does iOS, and I think maybe also Android, but they're very mobile focused. So if you want to get into mobile, you can find a company like that. Others like Pivotal Labs. When I was at Pivotal, it was mainly Ruby, but now it's actually pretty broad: Ruby, Node, mobile, Go. Typically, I think a company like that, though, will probably stick you in one technology, and at least to get started, because they're probably going to want you to get really good at one thing. But you'll still see a pretty wide variety of companies, of clients.
Okay, so my question is for you, Eli. Say you score that dream interview for the gig that you want. How does a Thomas go in there and prepare prior, and kind of what are you looking for once they're actually in the room or on the call?
Sure. So I feel like the number one thing, and this is sort of what Rockman alluded to, is enthusiasm for the job. There have been so many times in previous positions where I had that initial phone screen, and I asked, like, do you know what my company, the company I work for, does? And they'd be like, kind of. And I'd be like, okay, thank you. Thanks for your time. Like, I want to know that you want to work where I work. I want to know that it's something that's important to you, even if it's not like your life's dream to build this software. I want you to know, like, why you think it's relevant to our customers, why you think the technology is exciting, something about that. You know what I mean? Because I feel like as a junior developer, you're not going to come in probably and wow me with an incredible amount of experience. You're probably not going to have an incredibly deep amount of knowledge about web technologies. And I feel like the thing that you will have and can have in spades is enthusiasm and excitement and desire to learn. And that's more valuable than I think it gets credit for, because that stuff is infectious. If I'm working at a company for 2 years, 3 years, it's sometimes hard to sustain that level of enthusiasm. And I feel like I always loved interviewing people who were younger and sort of getting their career started, because they did have that verve and that passion to really work hard and solve problems and be awesome. And that made me be like, oh yeah, I love this stuff too. I love being awesome too. Like, let's work together. So I feel like it's one of the best things you can do. But beyond that, again, something that Lee mentioned is, like, make sure all your stuff's in order. GitHub-wise, make sure all your ducks in a row. I think it's really hard to prepare knowledge-wise, because you can go into that interview and that phone screen, they can ask you anything. So I've had junior developer friends who try and study, and it just seems like a fool's errand. They like cram a bunch of knowledge into their heads and then don't use any of it. So I think it's tempting to want to do that, but I don't think it's very effective.
Yeah, and then for those watching, when you get to the technical interview part, there certainly will be questions that you don't know how to answer. Thomas, I seem to recall when you were interviewing with Saul, he gave you some problems, and you were like, yeah. If I remember correctly, you didn't have an answer.
I prepared a little bit, but I did the cramming thing a little bit too much. But it's really just sort of, you're going to learn a lot on the job. You're going to learn a lot by doing projects and by working. So to show enthusiasm, I sort of learned the stack and went out and built my own projects using the specific stack that Thinkful uses. But when you get into the interview and you just don't know what to do, you just talk through it and work through the problem with your interviewer, because they're not there to trick you. They're there to help you through the problems, to see how you think, and get a sense of how you fit technically and culturally in the company.
Yeah. Well, so Lee, what do you recommend kind of interview-wise for people once they go in and start talking to people in person or on the phone?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing that's important, at least, maybe this is just sort of for me, but when I'm being interviewed, I kind of want to always make sure I'm like relaxed and kind of present in the moment. Sometimes the idea of like cramming before the interview can have a negative effect on you, where you're too worried, you're just kind of in your head. And I think a big part of any job is the culture fit. So you want to make sure that like you can get along with the people. Presumably the people interviewing you are people that are going to be on your team. So I think it's important to be yourself, to have an intelligent conversation and not view the relationship as adversarial, not try to feel like you have anything to prove, admit when you don't know something. And I think that that always helps you out because the interviewer is always looking for someone who's kind of intellectually honest and easy to work with.
So Lee, how does that work out with, there's obviously different types of people who go in with different backgrounds. How do they explain their backgrounds if they've learned in a like less traditional route than a computer science major, or even if, say, they're a junior developer, but they're more seasoned in their career and they're sort of switching into a career change?
Cool. I think that that's totally fine. Most places are, I think, very open to that. The important thing would be, talk about what you did, like why you care about it. Why did you find it interesting? Why did you go into it? And why are you changing? So what's exciting about this new career? What do you like about software? What do you like about this company in particular? And just build a story. I think that's true whether you're junior or senior. Your resume needs to tell a story. Yeah, I mean, I often have a story that I tell about how I switched from robotics into software and how I liked how software was maturing in a way that software meant for hardware really wasn't. Because with the web, like we can do this agile development thing, whereas in robotics, it's still very traditional and slow. So I sort of like tell that story, and it tells a little bit of who I am and what I care about.
Yeah.
I think it's important to come up with that narrative.
Yeah, the story thing that you mentioned, Lee, is I would personally just like to underline that because I'm involved in a lot of hiring for non-technical positions, and I do exactly the same thing from the moment I first see somebody's cover letter before I've even seen their resume, right? Like the email that I see, from that initial moment, I start building a story about them. So like having a story that you want to present to somebody and then actually delivering on that is really useful and something that I think a lot of people in hiring everywhere just pay a lot of attention to. Rockman, let me ask you and kind of flip it around. If somebody's interviewing with the company, they have a chance to talk with some developers there. What sort of things should they be looking for or asking if they're evaluating whether that's someplace they actually want to work or that they'd be happy?
Yeah, so I mean, one question to always ask every interviewer that you've talked to is, first off, how long have you been with the company? And even beyond that, what keeps you there? I mean, just in engineering, there's plenty of jobs available for really, quite frankly, everybody at this point. What keeps you at the same company? Why have you been here for 4 years? Why, like, what keeps you coming back every day? And what's the culture? What's the general culture like? What do you love most about the actual company itself? I think these are probably very key points. And you should also, while you're walking around throughout the office, you can kind of see how people are looking. If people are like hunched over, just miserable, then it's probably not the place that you necessarily want to be. You can definitely feel the vibe on the place. So I think that's probably some of the best questions. What the culture is like, things like that.
Cool. Eli, have you ever had an interviewee kind of stop you cold with a question and just be like, "Wow, that's a really good question"? Anything like that happen?
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen. I mean, one of my favorite questions to be asked and ask is, what is the one thing you would change about this company? Which is very similar to what keeps you here, but I also really want to know the weaknesses of the company. And I like it when people want to know that about the place where I work, because it forces me to be honest in a way. Because like as an interviewer, and this is something that I feel like junior developers may not know, is like they're trying to sell you also. You may be a junior, but they want you to work there because there's not a lot of programmers to go around. So if I'm interviewing you, I'm also trying to sell you on the company, and I sort of like being asked about the weaknesses of the company because I like the chance to be honest and the chance to show vulnerability, because I think that it goes from less of like a sales meeting or like a very rigid business transaction to being more of a thing where we actually get to talk about like, well, this is actually what I'm struggling with. These are the problems that I worry about. And then it often makes the candidate open up a little more things that they're struggling with, and I think we both get a more honest perspective of one another.
Very cool. And then Thomas, what about you? What kind of stuff are you asking people that you're interviewing?
What non-technical questions? Normally, the most interesting part of the interview is when we flip it around and they get to ask us questions, because I think that what they ask us and
As an interviewer?
Yeah.
Okay. Just clarifying.
Yeah. What they ask us sort of hints at what they're interested in, what they deem important at the job, and also helps us get to know them from like more of a cultural perspective, because up to that point the interview has been mainly technical. So it's nice to be able to be on the flip side of that. And I mean, we let them ask us technical questions and stuff too. So it's kind of fun to get to know them just as a person instead of just a candidate.
Do you remember as a candidate kind of the types of questions that you were wanting to know? Like how often do we get free food? Like things like that.
What do you wish you had asked when you were interviewing? What do you wish you'd asked Saul or Daryl before you got started?
I think I would have asked a little bit more about the direction and the immediately upcoming projects and the stuff that I would be working on, and sort of been able to talk through maybe what my place could be in those projects at that time, instead of like, well, free food.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we're.
I think there's just one quick question that I think we can squeeze in 2 extra minutes if you guys will bear with us. It's how do you kind of stand out? You've done the interview. There's a couple of other candidates that are in the running, and you really want to make sure that you get noticed and you're kind of in the running for stage 2. How have you guys have any good stories from experiences that you've had, or any suggestions for somebody kind of in that position? Let's start with Rockman on this one.
So I can remember one time, I'm not going to say which company, but there was a front-end engineer that we were interviewing, and we were already pretty keen on. I remember right after his interview was over, they were talking about a particular problem that they were having on the site. So he went home, he actually looked on our site, went through the entire thing and actually fixed the bug that we were talking about. I mean, he was able to spot it on his own, took the initiative, and just showed us like, well, this is what you guys are talking about, so here's a solution. It's like, okay, well, this guy can clearly now do the job, so we're going to hire him. But I don't personally like to ask people to do projects on their own, just because you're an active candidate. I mean, we don't want to take your time outside of when you're in the office and interviewing for us, and it's free work. We don't want to ask you to do that either. But if you proactively go ahead and do that, that just shows, again, the engagement, how interested you are, and on top of that, it shows that you can actually do the work that would probably require you to do. So that's something that was pretty awesome for us, and I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, very cool. Lee, anything along those lines?
I don't have a story nearly as good as that. Yeah, I mean, I think following up can be helpful. Particularly if this happens a lot, candidates will do during the interview. There'll be something that stumps the candidate, or we don't have time to get to it. They'll follow up with an email and say, hey, should have done it this way or whatever. That definitely can't hurt. Shows that you're interested in the job for sure. I've also had candidates email and say, hey, that thing that you showed me is really cool. I looked into it a little more. I learned this stuff. Especially for junior developers, I think just every opportunity that you have to demonstrate that you're someone who can take the initiative and can teach themselves new things is an opportunity you should take.
Yeah. And then I'll add one thing, small point to following up. The process of hiring people is hard, and it's a lot of work, and there are a lot of things to keep track of. So anything you can do that'll make it easier on that person to hire you, like keeping your email at the top of their inbox, saying thank you for simple things, simple follow-ups that also have a side effect of making their job easier, and remembering you are handy. And then Eli, I'll give you the last word. What kind of follow-up advice do you have for candidates?
It's already been said. Doing something on your own. I've had a candidate who just I often interview people about product sense as well, and we brainstormed about a product thing, and he just went and built it and then sent it to me. And again, it was the exact same thing that Brockman said. It was like, oh, you can do this, and you were willing to put in your own time, and you also got excited about this. It was just everything that is interesting to me. And if I was talking directly to a junior developer, I would say if you feel excited, channel your excitement. You don't have to just sit on your excitement and be like, oh, I'm so pumped about this, but I can't do anything about it. Let it come out. Do the thing that feels right. Because the worst thing that happens is you send a slightly creepy email to somebody, but the best case scenario is that you really knock someone's socks off and get a job.
Yeah.
I'm all about the slightly creepy emails. And that's my jam. But I think this is about a wrap, unless Thomas has any final words of wisdom from the trenches.
No, everything that I have has already been said.
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys covered it.
Work hard. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you to our panelists very, very much for taking some time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody watching now or in the future. Join us next week.
This has been awesome. Same time next week. And I think for the first time, we actually had the two ferns somewhat visible at the same time. So just had to point that out there for the record. Thanks, guys. It's been a blast, and we'll see you in a few.
Bye.